Now that you have compiled it and that you're inside Unreal Engine, you're going to go into C++ classes, third person tutorial, or whatever you named your project, and player character, or whatever you named your character. You're going to right click it, create blueprint class based on player character, and just rename it. First, I always forget to do this first. Set up your folders first. We're going to make a blueprints folder. We're going to make a levels folder. We're going to make a UI folder, and we are going to make a animations folder. Perfect. So this one, we're going to right click, create blueprint class, place it into blueprints folder. We will call this BP player character. We'll create the blueprint class. Perfect. So as you can see, we don't really have a mesh to apply to this. So after setting up all the basics, I will grab one from the asset store and include it in the project. So for now, I'll just compile, do on success, save, exit out. We're going to go back to C++ classes, third person tutorial game mode, or whatever your game mode is named that is here. Create blueprint class, put it in BP, change it to BP. I'm just going to change third person tutorial to TP tutorial. Oh, gotta edit that out. So after naming it, you're going to put it in blueprints, create blueprint class. We're going to set the default pawn to BP player character. Hit compile, go up to edit, project settings, maps and modes. We're going to set the game mode base as the BP that we just defined. Next, we're going to need to go and set up our inputs. So we are going to create some action mappings first. Create 2 to start. We'll call the first one jump. We'll call the second one crouch. We will set jump to spacebar, crouch to left control. You can set them to whatever you want. Now we need to make some axis mappings. So we're going to need to make 4. So open that up. Our first one will be move forward. Our second one will be move right. Our third one, look up. Our last one will be turn. So we are going to set turn to mouse X, look up to mouse Y, and then we are going to set move right. We're going to add another one. Move right will have D, or whatever you want your moving right to be, and then you'll have A, or whatever your walking left will be. You're going to set whichever one your left is, mine's A, to -1 because you're moving left, which is the opposite of right. You're going to add a second one to forward. I'm going to set W as my move forward, leave it as 1. I'll set S as my moving backwards. Set that as well to -1 because backwards is the opposite of forwards. Now our inputs are set up. I'm going to quickly save this level under levels. I will call it testing area. Okay, so now that we have our animations and our character, what we're going to want to do is set them to our player. So you want to go into the BP player character, or whatever you named it, click the mesh, and set it to whatever character you imported. So now we have him here. We're going to hit compile before we start messing with it. So let's take him and try and align him with this front vector of the capsule. So we'll set the rotation to -90 to move him to the front. We'll set the location to -90 to drop him inside. Perfect. So now if we load into the game, we will have him. You can move forward, back, left, right, and move your mouse all around. I do have it so that the up and down is locked. I feel that fits better for a third person, but you can change that yourself personally. So one thing is that the functionality is not there for this character. We need to add some functionality. It's not really that nice looking to just stare at your character in a T-pose as they move. So what we're going to do is we're going to go, where did our, could have sworn we added a folder called animations. So now what we're going to do, now that we have animations loaded, we're going to go right click, animation, animation blueprint. You're going to select the target that you put, the target skeleton that you put on your player, and then hit OK. We're going to name this BP player underscore anim. Click into it. Okay. So this will all look really confusing if you've never approached this before. So I'll make it very simple for you. Just follow along with what I do and you'll start to get the hang of it. So what you can do, this is your output pose. What you could do right off the bat is go through your animations, grab, let's say, idle rifle hip. So now the default animation for this will be this. And that's great. You could, if you have an NPC that just stands there and does the same thing, you could set this for them. But we want a little bit of functionality. We're going to use something that's called a state machine. What a state machine does is it controls the animation state of whatever you assign this to. So we are going to drag off of the entry of the state machine. Your first will always be your idle, because this is what you want it to enter into first. Regardless of if your guy starts running, whatever, you want to start on idle. We're going to double click into idle and then drag. That's not right. Is that the right one? No. Idle rifle hip. Okay. Drag that into the result. Compile. It's the same thing that we saw before, but now we have functionality where we can change it. So, how do we move from idle to movement? We get our speed like we set as a public variable in our C++. So what we're going to do is go over to event graph. This is neatly laid out already for us. Our update and our try get pawn. Off of try get pawn, you're going to drag and say cast to BP player character. From there, drag off of that and promote to variable. We're going to call this player reference. Perfect. So off of player reference, you're going to drag and say get speed. This is that public variable that we set inside our C++. Now from this, we just simply drag off, promote to variable again, and we will call this one player speed. Connect our path, run back over here. Here's the problem though. Update runs every delta second, also known as the tick. We don't want it every single second to get the pawn owner and cast it to a character and set these. That's going to be expensive. And we want to, the most as possible, preserve our resources. So what we can do instead is say is valid. So we are going to ask the system if this player reference is valid. How you get this is you drag out player reference from your variables over here. When you let go, you'll get and set. Press get. Drag this into the input object. So now it is checking. It's asking the system every second, does this exist? If it doesn't exist, we're going to go and create it and set our variables. If it already exists, all we need to do is just say, hey, use that, get the speed from it, and update our speed. So what we're going to do is drag out player speed, set player speed, drag speed into player speed. Is valid, we'll set that. Hit compile. So now we have a functioning graph. You can also clean it up a bit, drag this somewhere over there, just make it look nicer. So now what happens is exactly like explained. If player reference exists, we update the speed every second, which is perfect. So now we'll go back to our state machine, We will drag off from idle and create a new state. We will call this movement. And we can drag back off of movement back towards idle for another transition. Now we'll want to select our movement animation. I'm just going to choose jog forward rifle. Depending on the pack you choose, it could be different assets. This is for free. This asset's available for free on the Unreal Marketplace under the Free Forever pack by Epic Games. So now if you go to New State Machine, we can go to these transition rules. So our transition rule from idle to movement, let's think about this logically for a second. We want to go from standing to moving. We'll want to get our player speed, and we're going to check if the player speed is 0. We're going to add another Boolean condition, which is true and false. So we're going to say if it is not 0. If player speed is not 0, we can enter the transition. You can actually just go ahead and copy this, go back to your New State Machine, go into the transition from movement back to idle, paste it. So this doesn't apply though, because we want if movement is 0. So you can just leave it as equals equals. If movement is 0, we can go right back into idle. Hit compile, save, exit out. Go over to your blueprint, into the blueprint class for player. Oh, it seems we didn't compile it, that's fine. So we're going to hit mesh over here. And you can see in the viewport when it applies, make sure mesh is selected. Over here you will see animation, anim class. Click anim class, you will see your BP player anim pop up. Apply it, hit compile, save, and when we play, our animations are there. Perfect. There's our functionality that we wanted. Although, however, we don't have really a jumping animation. It knows that the velocity is more than 0. And we also don't have crouch, even though we can see that our player is physically crouching. Let's add some crouch functionality. So if we go into animations, we can very simply, the same way, drag off of player reference and say get is crouched, is crouching. That's what we set before. B is crouching, the public boolean we set. We want to get that now. So now you will drag off of that, promote to variable, drag this to set. And now for is valid, very simply, sorry, I'm just gonna type this in and change it to player is crouching and hit compile. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to drag off of player reference again, get is crouching. We're going to take our player is crouching, set, drag into it, and drag our transition to it. Perfect, so compile. Now we have our crouching being defined here and updated here. Now we can go back to our state machine and we can say a new state here. We will call the state crouched idle. We will drag over and say crouched movement. Oops, sorry. Add a state and name the state crouched movement. Perfect. So now you can go ahead and connect all of these nodes to each other. Perfect. Okay. So to move from idle to crouched idle, first we're going to set our crouch idle rifle hip. Compile. Perfect. Go back to new state machine. Crouched movement. We're going to say crouch walk forward rifle hip. Perfect. Compile. We need conditions to move between. So to move between movement and crouched movement, all we need to check is the player crouching. So we'll say get player is crouching. We're moving from movement to crouched movement if the player is crouching, so this will be true right here when it's checked. To get that, you will drag off and just say equals equals and click it to get true. So if the player is crouching, you may transition. And we will copy this, go into the return, so from crouched to movement, paste it, so if not, so false, if player is not crouching, you may move into it. Now we need to go from crouched movement to idle. We can simply copy this, go over to crouched idle to crouched movement, and paste. But before we put it in, we want to say and as a double checking feature. We want to make sure player crouching equals equals true. It's a little safety check to make sure. So if speed is greater than, or if speed is not 0 and the player is crouching, we can enter the transition. Copy this, new state machine, from crouched movement to crouched idle. Simply remove the not, plug it in, compile. So now what we have is we have a transition from movement to crouched movement, and from crouched movement to crouch idle, we just need to add idle. Very simply, we just check from moving from idle to crouched idle, is the player crouching? So we'll say equals equals true. If the player is crouching, move to that. Just copy it, move to crouched idle to idle, paste. If the player is not crouching. We can further safety check, but because we have our safety checks between these two movements here, it will always make sure before moving between these. So now we're going to go, we will hit play, when we press crouch, our player crouches. Holding crouch, we can walk, we are crouch walked. To make this better, I'm just going to move the camera up a bit. What we can do for that is click spring arm, move it here. You can press E to quick select your rotation, and I'm going to hit compile. Play. Now we have a bit of an upward angle. When I press control, I crouch. There we go. Crouch movement. If I let go of control while I'm moving, it will move to walking. Crouch, walk, crouch, walk. Perfect. So now, besides the jumping animation, we can add that later. We have functionality with most of our character movement.